Alright, well hello there. Welcome to my Redout Space Assault review. Now, this is probably not a very necessary review. I don't think the world really needs to know about this game. But I did feel compelled, since I had made a first thoughts or first impressions video, and then I had also included in that video some instructions because I feel like the game is needlessly complicated in its control scheme, and so I was trying to help folks out so that hopefully they would have a better time with the game. Now that was when I was just past a third of the game, and now I have completed the game, so I wanted to give my thoughts on it. And I think actually overly complicated says it quite a bit. Now, ostensibly, this is basically like a Starfox-64 ripoff, basically. The game is basically the same. It's essentially an on-rail shooter that occasionally gives you full movement control. You fight bosses, you're in a spaceship, you occasionally have wingmen, there's like mission goals. So on paper, this game is very much Star Fox 64, and that's great because Star Fox 64 came out now decades ago, and it hasn't really ever gotten a proper sequel, and I think there's a lot of people who are waiting for a sequel. The problem is this game does some really confusing things that I'm not really sure where they're coming from, and they just hold the game back. And eventually, by the end of it, it's also too long for its own good, for its own quality, rather. By the end of it, you're just kind of tired of it because it hasn't done anything new in a long time, and it's doing a lot of really frustrating things that I just feel unnecessary. So, in order to illustrate that, let's go ahead and jump into the final mission of the game. Now, obviously, that's a huge spoiler, and probably not really very fair to the game. But here, I'll tell you this much. Listen, this game is $10 at retail, so you can probably find it on sale at some point, you know, for much cheaper. It's worth a shot. You know, it's an afternoon or two, or probably a little bit longer, actually, because of some of the difficulty that I'm going to get into later. But it's a short game. You're going to get your money's worth out of it. So, you know, this is definitely not one of those games that you should avoid at all costs. It's going to be disappointing in another way. But if you have $10 to spare, if you're a huge fan of Star Fox 64, go ahead and give this game a shot. If any of that sounds even interesting, you know, for $10, you could spend $10 in worse ways. But that's pretty much as far as I can go with the recommendation. And I feel like I do need to showcase the actual gameplay. And I think the final mission is just perfect for that. So let's jump into that. Now, this is your ship, which you can customize. It gets increasingly harder and harder to customize the ship because it actually becomes harder to earn points on missions. You don't just get points for replaying missions. Like if you happen to pick up coins during the missions, you get that score, but it's very low. You mostly get missions from completing one-time objectives on those missions. So once those 3 objectives are done, you get a significantly lower score for those missions. So it actually gets pretty hard to keep upgrading your ship by the end. So even though, like, sometimes you'll feel like there's a lot of grinding necessary in the game, that grinding becomes more and more difficult. So that's not great. There's a nice amount of color schemes to choose from. That's pretty cool, I guess. By the way, Redout is a different series of games also. It's a free-to-play game like where you kind of create a vehicle, I guess. So this is an offshoot of that, but this is, you know, it feels a little bit related, but not the same. You can't like build your ship or ever really change it. Just change the color.
We'll hold them for as long as we can. Just
all right,
make
so
sure to take down that monster.
This is it. This is the final mission.
Thank you all.
And
we would not be here if it were not for your sacrifices.
Sorry, I'm going to talk over the dialogue, which is not badly acted, but it's like pretty generic. And even though there's a semblance of an interesting story but in this game, it's not really explored in any way. So, and there's no like, there's not even like a payoff cutscene or anything at the end for beating the game. You know, that's pretty bad. Like, Star Fox has a pretty epic conclusion.
Go back to Earth and tell the UN that the Genesis colony will declare independence. We'll reach Mars on our own.
Is that so? It won't happen, Barrett. Without the Genesis Iridium, nobody will reach Mars. I think I'll send them your head instead, and they'll appreciate it.
Okay, so finally all that dialogue's done. I can't stand, you know, mandatory dialogue in a cutscene that you have to listen to every time you try again. But, you know, this mission's pretty straightforward. Blow up the big ship, right? Save the galaxy. Yeah, perfect. But now we get into some of the weirdness of the gameplay in this game. So basically, I have a fire button, which is not my laser button, it's my missile button. So really in this game, you're intended to mostly just control your missiles and like kind of choose what to lock onto. Okay. Now obviously in this mission, as you can see, I have free control of the ship. That's not always the case. And we'll see that actually in a minute that's going to change. But for now, I can just fly around the ship and just come back and make, you know, runs on these engines that I'm taking down. Obviously, I'm ignoring all these turrets. But yeah, so I'm shooting the missiles, but my ship is auto-firing the 3 sub-weapons that I also have equipped, which you may not have even noticed. Watch for these lasers coming off my wings. So that's one of them. And it just kind of fires as soon as I get into range of something that is in my crosshairs. It just fires automatically. You can have up to 3 sub-weapons equipped. And there's 5 different types. That's kind of cool. But the weird thing is the game doesn't expect you to fire them. The default way to fire them is to have them on auto fire, and I found out that that's actually the best way to have them. They're just kind of weird, so I just leave them on auto fire and just hope that I have a good combination for the level that I'm playing. Now obviously I blew up all those engines, so now we're back to this. There's these towers on the map, which you may not have noticed. I didn't notice for the first like 6 times that I played this. There's actually lasers on the bottom of these that are firing at that ship. So really the countdown of this mission is keeping my ship alive. Once my ship is dead, I can no longer take a crack at this. Okay. That's not really like very clear from the beginning. Okay. But as you can see, now that I've started attacking this tower, I've gone into like a sort of on-rails thing. I have very little control over my ship now. Like, even though I would prefer to target those turrets, I'm basically on rails and forced to mostly target that main gate that I just shut down. And, you know, and here I can move around this tunnel, but I can't even change like the direction, the orientation. I'm just kind of locked into this view, you know. There's a lot of sponginess in the late game of this game, so that, you know, you're just kind of like shooting and shooting and shooting, and you're like, okay, So now I've destroyed the tower. I now steal the laser, and I have to use that to attack the main ship. But it's kind of weird. I don't really have that much control over like when it powers up. Okay, now I'm back to freeform flying. Okay. So next tower. Watch again how it goes into the on-rails gameplay. So because of that, I don't really have any control over where my missiles are firing. They're just randomly locking onto these enemies that are on the fringe of my view. But I'm trying to make short work of this like power coupling or whatever, just by keeping my auto weapons directed at it. But only like 1 or 2 of my missiles are going to that thing. So it's weird. It's this really weird thing where I have like an obvious objective, but the game is not really letting me use the only weapon that I can control on that. That seems so bizarre to me. Again, like I would like to just destroy these turrets so that I don't have to listen to this missile lock-on warning constantly. But I can't really do that. I can't move in a way that will change my sub-weapons enough to be able to fire them at those turrets. So I'm just at the mercy of my missiles, which don't really do all that much damage, even like upgraded to level 10. I mean, I guess I'm shooting like, you know, like 13 missiles, but it just, everything feels like it takes so long to kill. The graphics are pretty good, but you probably already noticed by now that it's kind of hard to tell what's going on at any point. Like your ship's profile is just a little bit too small, and there's so many other like bright things competing for attention that it's kind of hard to tell where you go sometimes. And again, because the camera is not always doing what you want it to do or what you think it would do even under like an automatic setting, you can actually completely lose track of where you are in this game, which makes some levels, like the ones where there's some kind of race or something, really hard, because sometimes you're like having to make this like perfect run of a level, but you lose track of your ship entirely. It's really weird. So yeah, just a lot of really confusing things about the game, to where you're like, were they trying to do something to the gameplay there actually, or was it just like bad game design? It's hard to tell. But you kind of feel it throughout the game. You know, you have I think the better parts of the game are towards the beginning, where you're still learning it. It feels like a tutorial. And you're like, oh, okay, this game's gonna actually have a lot of depth. And it gets exciting because you're like, oh, what if Star Fox had evolved? But it never gets to that point, you know, and it kind of feels like, what if like Sega or a competing company at the time made a competing Star Fox that was just very similar, but hadn't really had the benefit of any kind of evolutionary leap in game design. So unfortunately, that's what it is here in Redout Space Assault. A game that I initially, when I started playing, I was like, oh wow, this is going to be great, and it just kind of plateaued very quickly. And there's nothing really that stands out. So I haven't kept up with any news of this game, so I don't know if they're promising any kind of DLC or patch or anything. I would think it's not likely. So as it is, you kind of have to take the game with its lumps. But it's not impossible to enjoy.
It's really going down.
By the way, figuring out everything that I just did to complete that mission took me about 20 tries because it's just not clear, really, like, what the best route to do that is.
What a speech. You sly dog. Have you ever heard of William Wallace? No, but it has a nice ring to it. We need a name for our little uprising. How about the Wallace Society? I hate it, but hey, whatever floats your boat.
It's epic.
There's so much to be done. Ladies and gentlemen, let's head home. We have a society to rebuild.
The ship doesn't even move forward. I just not noticed that. So yeah, that's the big payoff. That's the big payoff for completing the game. Again, it's a $10 game. How much can you really ask for? So, you know, I guess buyer beware. Alright, hope that was helpful to anybody. You know, I do like to keep up with, like, smaller indie games and what ifs. That used to be the kind of thing that dominated the game market. Nowadays, it's kind of all about AAAs and, like, super indies that sometimes have very limited appeal. So I was kind of hoping that this would be like a surprise, like mid-tier, or, you know, like lower tier, really, pleasure, but it's not really that. Still probably worth a shot, and, you know, like I said, it's a worthy diversion, but don't get your hopes up. Alright, see y'all later. Bye.